Joining us now, we are honored by the three-time National Player of the Year, the GOAT, one of the GOATs in softball history, Olympian multiple times, three times, I think. I've lost track, gold medalist, and now, of course, been an analyst for the Longhorn Network, concluding her second season. Our good friend Kat Osterman back with us here. How have you been?
Been good. Been busy, but been good. Can't
So
complain.
we're going to talk a little Big 12 because you've covered that pretty closely the last couple of years. But I want to first start with you're obviously finishing up your second season working with Alex Loeb on the Longhorn Network. What has that been like for you? Now, for those that don't know, you've been doing games prior to that. You've been still do some games over at Texas State on ESPN Plus, but the last two seasons been mostly Longhorn Network, and you got to even work a regional last year. What has that been like?
It's been a lot of fun. I think a lot of people don't remember way back when my fifth year of school, I actually did two games for ESPN, one at Arizona State matchup and then a Tennessee Alabama matchup. I actually got to call Monica Abbott breaking my strikeout record, which was an interesting moment. But I got into it and I actually was part of LHN when it first launched. And then I went to Texas State, which meant I couldn't commentate anymore because I was doing that while I was coaching Division II softball. But getting back in the booth is something that interests me as soon as I knew I was stepping away from softball. And my first year, right there at Texas State in 2021, I did their broadcast on Plus, and thankfully got the opportunity to slide over to LHN and take over the full slate for the last 2 years. But I enjoy it. I enjoy still being around the game. I enjoy being able to still talk to coaches that I either played against or built relationships with from my time in coaching. I think people don't realize I actually college coached for 12 years, which seems like a really long time. Although then I hear coaches who have been at their schools for 20 plus, and I'm like, maybe 12 isn't that long. But it's just fun to, get to talk to these coaches, and some of them I know what their program's about because I played against them or I've interviewed them enough times, and others I don't, and I get to know. So you mentioned like last year I got a regional, super excited to do that, but I got to talk to Rodney DeLong for a second time, I believe, because he had been slated to play Texas before a rainout, and then watch his program play. And then, in that I kind of became a fan. I know it was on Twitter, I joked being a fan of, I shouldn't say joked, I seriously am a fan of Skylar Savage and the way she pitched against Nebraska, but then just becoming a fan of their program by the way he carries himself and the way they play. And so it's fun to commentate and get to see all sorts of programs and how they operate and get the ins on it from their coaches, and obviously share that with the viewers along with the game itself. And I think the fun part to me is I get to put on all my hats. I get to put on being an analyst, but yet also having played and having coached, and see certain situations from all sides.
What's that like when you do a conference call with the opposing teams? And I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much you want to get into it. Like, I know a lot of them are usually it's coaches. Sometimes it could be coaches and a player. What is that like when they first see you? Because in some cases, for example, when you did Oklahoma last year, it's Patty Gasso gets to see you, so you get to reminisce. But then there's others. They're like, hey, you're Kat Osterman. What is that like? That first few moments where you're in the conference call and they're like, do they like what is that vibe like?
It varies. It's fun when it's a coach like Coach Gasso, who I played against, or even Coach Moore, who I obviously just did last week. They're very respectful, and a lot of times, if we get into the history of rivalries or whatever, like Coach Gasso had a ton of stories about the Red River rivalry from when I was in school, although it wasn't called that back then. So, but and then, there's others where like I did a remote game, A&M and Ole Miss. And it's the first time I really got to interact with Jamie Traxel at Ole Miss. But yet the first couple minutes, she was very complimentary of myself, my career. She said she had explained to her SID who I was and how cool this was, opportunity it was. And, that's just, it's something now that I'm older, it's kind of like, oh, you didn't have to do that. I'm doing a job as an analyst, but also really cool when coaches, share that with their programs. And it's part of the game, but it's fun. It's fun to talk to all these coaches. And even Coach Ravel last year, Nebraska was at that regional, and we got to go down memory lane because Nebraska was in the Big 12 when I played. So I'd had to let her in on the secret that there was once upon a time that Kat Osterman wanted to be the next Jenny Voss and wore a headband across my forehead and swore I was going to go to Nebraska. Unfortunately, that was very short lived, but I did love watching them play. So I got to share that with her. And so it's always a fun situation. In fact, when I get to see players might be kind of they get wide-eyed. We had Fordham for that regional as well, and their coach asked, "Hey, can we put some players on a Zoom with you?" And so two of their seniors came on, and it was really cool just to talk to them and get to, get their thoughts on their season, and they got to interact with an analyst and especially as myself, and they were just very complimentary and excited. So, it's just giving back in little ways.
I would imagine, yeah. And I would imagine it's easier for you to get stuff out of coaches and players because of who you are than, say, somebody else that might be asking similar questions just because, hey, this is Cat Osterman. I'm going to definitely, I'm going to be like open up because I can't believe I'm talking to this person. But there's that respect right away, that presence you have coming in that a few analysts have that, and you're one of them.
Yeah, well, I think you garner the reputation as an analyst based on how you talk to people, how you use the information, how you present it when you represent their program on air. And I feel like I get a good amount out of all of my questions when I ask coaches. But don't get me wrong, I also get people who are like, okay, now don't go tell your friends at Texas this, because everyone knows I am still close to the program there. But never repeat anything I hear on interviews to Texas by any means. I would never cross that line. So but it's always the running joke. I think Rodney DeLong did that to me earlier this year when I was like, hey, do you know who you're going to start on Wednesday so I can go ahead and prep? And he's like, don't go tell anybody. I was like, I promise I won't.
If it makes you feel better,
prepping.
If it makes you feel better, they tell me the same thing when I'm doing my own prep. They're like, wait, don't tell Coach UCF. No, I'm not. Like, it's just,
yeah.
And I don't usually ask him who's throwing. So obviously you need to know for obvious reasons. But that's always the awkward part when either myself or the analyst that's with me is asking about, hey, tell me about your pitchers and what they're throwing. And the coaches are like, kind of gets very sensitive on that because they're like, they think it's like, that's going to come out to the world or something. So I know that reaction very well. What have you learned from these 2 years you didn't know about broadcasting going in? Because you've done broadcasting, but I'm sure you've picked up some stuff with the high production LHH done, with the big production meetings, obviously working with Alex, doing a regional. What have you learned in these 2 seasons?
I think the biggest thing as an analyst that I've had to learn to look at is the fact that there's one big long story usually throughout the season. And I'm so used to as a player and a coach, you go game by game, and the ultimate, goal is either a conference tournament or getting, in the right seating for a possible postseason berth. And so you don't look back and see the storyline that goes with the season. And so for me, it's been figuring out, whether it's an individual player storyline, a program storyline, what it is, and being able to tap into that and see how that is playing into their season. And I think for a while I was like, I can talk the game easy, and I still can talk the game when I sit down and watch it, whether I'm commentating or just sitting with friends watching. But now it's telling the story that goes with it, and that's the part that I've had to get used to, but that I'm learning to also follow as season goes on. Or if you get a random game that you're not used to calling, going back and looking, I'm fortunate. I do all of LHN. So I get Texas all year long, but I follow Big 12. But the 2 remote games I got this year was kind of the first time I say random, but I had games that I wasn't familiar with the programs yet thrown in. And so, going back and looking through their schedule and news and notes and figuring out what's the story, what is making this team tick? Are they turning a corner? What kind of thing, if they're not and they went in a downslide, what happened, and being able to tell that respectfully.
Working with Alex, how quickly were you two able to develop a chemistry that you both have? I would assume you've known him for a while, considering you're there often, even prior to doing LHS. So I'm sure you've crossed paths. They've done stuff on you on that network. So in fact, they've done marathon days on based on you. That's not many people can say that. What about developing that broadcasting relationship with Alex Loeb?
Yeah, Alex and I had crossed paths. We knew each other. And so when I got back in the booth, it was pretty smooth. I mean, we still talk over each other a little bit, but I think every set of partners probably does, just because both people get ideas at the same time when there's a pause in conversation. But it was smooth. I enjoy his company. I enjoy talking to him. We usually have a text chain going throughout the week. I mean, even the last 2 days with Texas being at Baylor, we were texting about what was going on and, how is this going to play out as far as seeding. And so, we're always looking at the game and figuring out, how is that going to impact the story that we tell the next time we go on TV. And obviously now we're going to wait a regional. We're going to hope maybe we get to stay at home, but maybe we'll get sent somewhere. Who knows? But then, we'll start looking at what the storylines are and what story we're going to tell in that regard.
What's it been like balancing? Obviously you're played there. You're an icon at Texas, so obviously you've got Texas blood. You're gonna root. You're rooting for Texas to do well. On the other hand, though, you're on the broadcast. There are other fans listening, watching. So how do you balance that out? Where hey, the broadcast, everybody benefits because everybody goes through that to some extent. I've made a big effort on that on my broadcast to make sure that the opposing team is well represented and it comes to as close to as a national broadcast as it comes. What has that been like for you?
At first, it was a little bit difficult, like not intentionally, but last year, my first couple weeks of games, I kept saying we instead of Texas or they. And so for me, and it was almost automatic without really thinking about it. And it was brought to my attention, hey, you're not on the field, you're not Texas right now. And I was like, no, you're right. And so I had to get used to that. But, every time I approach it as we won a really good softball game and I want to talk about a really good softball game. So if I keep it in that regards, it's a lot easier to be able to commentate without so much bias or without my inflection of my voice, giving away whether I want Texas to win. And I think the big thing too is, and I felt like this in the fall, we did one fall ball game and Odessa College came down and they were coming off a third place finish at the junior college national championship. And their coach kept telling us that in his interview. And I finally said, Coach, don't worry. Like we will give you guys, you're playing 10 innings, no matter what, we're going to give you guys your due. And I looked at it and I'm like, sometimes there might be one player that this game might be their moment. And if we're too much focused on the fact that, we obviously know Texas like the back of our hand because we do all their home games, but there might be one player on that other team. This might be the only moment they get on TV, or this might be the one time they get a big pinch hit and, they're going to go save the clip from Twitter. So we might as well do it right. And so I approach it that game. I want to call a good softball game and, give every athlete their due the way we can. And so it's been a little bit easier. I also have some silent cheers occasionally when big things happen. So I don't do it on air. If I get too excited, you hit the mute button. But there have been a few times where there's some fist pumps in the booth, and but we just move on and talk about it like there was no emotion going on.
The mute button is could be your best friend in many cases. On that, you mentioned Monica Abbott earlier. I did not know that story, that you were there calling when she broke your record, which is kind of unique. She's made headlines this year announcing her retirement. I want to get your reaction. I know you've commented on it on social media, but somebody you've known very well for a long time. What was that like when you heard the news of Monica kind of retiring? Because she was still playing professionally in Japan, which is still with Team USA, even up in recent as last summer. What was your reaction? Were you caught off guard? Were you kind of like, hey, this could be close to time?
I think I knew it was coming at some point. She had retired after her last Japan season. I saw her in December after knowing that. And, I kind of asked her what's next. And she had said she didn't know. She was still feeling things out. We've always had conversations about how do you do clinics? How do you do lessons? She's asked about college coaching in the past. And so I know she has interest to stay close to the game. And so I thought maybe she would give USA one more summer before she decided to be done. But at the same time, I also know what it takes to continue training for just that one time slot. So, I wasn't surprised, but I was a little bit surprised just because I thought she was going to go maybe one more summer. But I don't know. I don't know what told me that, she might be leaning that way. But I also know what it's like to be in her shoes, and she got married, and you want to be able to live life. And, with the uncertainty of 2028 and plus, I'm sure she could play in 2028 if she wanted to. but playing in 2020 at 39 was difficult. And so she would be close, if not past that in age when 2028 came. So I just know what all that takes, and it's a lot. And I know, she wants to do life. I can imagine somewhere maybe she's thinking about having kids or something. So, there's time now to live life. And so I'm happy for her. She seemed like she was very at peace and happy with her decision. So I'm happy for her because, she totally did a lot. She did a lot for our game. She made a name for herself, obviously, left a legacy, and just, was able to continue playing for so long at a high level that it's admirable. It's something that sometimes, her and I train differently. We are very different personalities even. And there's times that I looked at her and I was just impressed with the way she was able to train and how she went about things. And that's what worked for her. And I did what worked for me, but I think, we were able to, in the end, we were teammates for so long, be able to look at each other and just, there's a mutual respect, there's a friendship. And so, she talked me into coming back, and then she was happy for me when I left again. So obviously super happy for her to be able to hang him up on her own terms and then continue to impact the game however she feels like is best for her.
What's the hardest thing she'll have to get used to? What's that adjustment period like? I don't know if you've offered her any advice on that. You've gone through it. What is that adjustment period going to be like with her that she doesn't have a game? Because there's that adrenaline rush that you can't duplicate.
Well, I think the biggest adjustment for me, and she may have it too, we'll see, is when you go to train, when you go to continue to work out to make sure you're staying healthy, staying strong, staying fit, however you want to do that. As an athlete, we do it to constantly get stronger so that way our game is impacted. And when you're done playing, you don't have to continue to push the limits to get stronger and stronger because there's not a game that it's impacting. And so it's trying to find that balance of how do you work out to where you're still fulfilling your competitiveness? Because even in the weight room, it's like, you go up in a lift by 5 pounds and you're excited or something, but now in everyday life, you don't have to do that. So are you going to do it just because you want to, or is your competitiveness going to get filled by just completing your workout? Or, that's where I think some people get into marathons and half marathons and sprint triathlons and whatever. But there's a competitive desire and juices that you have to figure out how those are going to get released. And, I don't know that I always get mine out either. I have 2 brothers. I think maybe we do it by bragging rights in our family text message, but occasionally I have to go for a run and try to beat a time that I just make up in my head. So that way I'm going out and trying to work towards something.
There you go. I knew that juices were got to be going somewhere there. The juices will be flying, I'm sure, for both of you as you watch softball this week, the conference tournament. I know you're going to be close paying attention to the Big 12 tournament taking place in OKC. Let's talk about a little Big 12 softball. First of all, when I say Big 12 and a Big 12 tournament or OKC, what pops into your mind from your memories, either as a player or just as an observant?
Oh man. So when you say OKC, I think Big 12 tournament and World Series, because we played both there and they still do. The first memory that pops to mind, goes back to the oldest memory of being there, and that's when we won the Big 12 tournament my freshman year. And I still remember we struck out Kim Oji looking to win the game against Nebraska. And that was like kind of my first taste of success in Oklahoma City. So that was fun. And then obviously we go to our World Series opener against Louisiana, and we went down 2-0 really quick, and I gave up a massive bomb, and thankfully my team was able to come back and hit 2 home runs of themselves, and we won 3-2. But that was a crazy game. And then now I look at it and it's so different in the fact that when I was there, the stands literally only went past third and first base. There were grassy knolls down into the outfield where everybody's brothers and sisters were like rolling down the hill mid-game, and not quite sliding on boxes like the Little League World Series, but I mean, that's where people sat on blankets and stuff. Kids played and ran around. And obviously when they extended the stands that way, it changed it. And now they've extended upwards. It's just incredible, the updates that they've made and the upgrades, that it almost doesn't look like the same stadium I played in. But it's really cool to go and be there and see the fandom. I was there last year. Texas made their run, and so I followed along. And I actually did an autograph session with Amanda Chittister during a fan experience one day. And the amount of fans that say that was a bucket list item for them. I don't think back in the day when I played, there were a lot of people that was a bucket list item. It was like you went if you were cheering for the teams that were there. But obviously we weren't on TV as much. There weren't just the avid softball fans, I don't think. So now for it to be a bucket list item and have people that are, buying tickets the second they're released 9 months in advance or whenever it is,
Yeah.
like it's just crazy. But it's a cool crazy. And so it was fun to see last year the atmosphere of that stadium now versus when I played.
Yeah, I've got that on my radar. Probably in the next year or two, with the changes in the Big 12, me going there, maybe even next year, which is going to be a pretty historic Big 12 tournament for many reasons. But that's definitely on my bucket list. You've won me over on this. I'm gonna have to look into this now.
Yeah, you have to go. I mean,
If I
I
throw
should
your
probably
name
put
out
it.
there, is that going to help me at all? Like, does that help?
If you were in Austin, it may help.
Okay, fair, fair.
I don't know if open Oklahoma City it helps a whole lot. But no,
Understandable.
like heck, I might have to make a trip up there next year for the last Big 12 tournament that Texas is in. So we'll see.
Deal. Hey, deal. Here you go.
If
You
I'm
and
not
I go.
assigned, yeah, if I'm not assigned a Big 12 tournament for commentating, I might make the trip and one last hurrah. It's gonna be so weird to see Texas in the SEC.
It's going to be weird. Yeah, I mean, big card. I mean, Oklahoma and Texas next year will be their last year. You're going to have new members like UCF, Houston, and BYU that you're going to be talking about next year as well. It's gonna be one of those years they're going to be talking about like decades from now. They're like, did that really happen? Like, it's going to be really unique, bizarre. But what's interesting is the Big 12 has gone through this before. You've mentioned it. I mean, Nebraska used to be in the league. Texas A&M has been through the league, and the league has kind of
Missouri.
Missouri. So you've kind of know what it's like in a weird way because you've seen this happen before.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, you talk about some of the matchups from the old days and, as big as OU Texas is and Bedlam is with Oklahoma State, Texas and A&M had that same type of Bedlam rivalry. And it ultimately died when A&M left for the SEC because forever Texas sports didn't play A&M in regular season because of that move. And, slowly sports have started to play in regular season. Softball still hasn't. But like I know baseball does. And I think basketballs and volleyball might have done it, but it took a while for that to start. So it'll be interesting because that rivalry will obviously get renewed in the SEC now. But even then, you talk about a couple years after I was done, and you talk about the fight for the Big 12, and you're talking Blair Luna and Chelsea Thomas, and people are like, "Wait, Missouri was in the Big 12?" Like, yeah, Missouri was in the Big 12. Nebraska was in there and really good. I mean, my first 2 years, Nebraska was probably who we were fighting for the Big 12 title more often. And then, Cammie Kiter was my year and her class plus a couple others after her. OU became a big force in there my last 2 years, and we were fighting with them for the title as well. So it's been a big change, and it's going to continue to do. I mean, the big thing is we didn't really add anybody when all those guys left, and now you're adding people. So that's kind of going to be the big difference is now saying, UCF, U of H, BYU, like that just doesn't sound like the Big 12, but it's what we're going to have to get used to.
Just like UCLA, you're gonna be in the Big Ten in a couple years. Like, it's just thankfully we don't depend on conferences for geography lessons, but that's kind of
Yeah.
what you
Well,
do.
I think that's the big thing is conferences are no longer anything close to geographical.
No, it's not. It's wild, but you're right. It's kind of unique. I mean, I still have to. It's funny every time from time to time, they'll show your game against Scarborough, Texas, and Texas A&M, and people are kind of thrown off by that. Like, wait, what? You guys played? Yeah, you played against each other. That was like a big deal.
Yep. Yeah, she came in. She was a freshman, I believe, the year I got back from the Olympics, and so we played 2 years against each other. And yeah, I mean, her and Megan Gibson were a dynamic duo, both offensively and defensively in the circle. So it made it, in fact, I think my junior year is the one year we didn't win conference title, and I think they won it if I remember right.
Yeah,
So yeah,
strong up. I
yeah,
have
they
a
were a
feeling
force.
that footage might be showing up in the next couple of weeks, depending on how things play out. But First talk Big 12 tournament here. Obviously, Oklahoma's the story nationally. Big 12 champions once again. Only the one loss to Baylor, which was a non-conference game. They had played a non-conference tournament prior to conference. Obviously, they're stacked. Once again, what jumps out to you when you see Oklahoma play this year? What this version of Patty Gasso's team?
I think the one thing that stands out isn't even tangible. Like it's not a stat. It's just flat out confidence. You say they have the one loss to Baylor, but then they have a couple games where, Texas was 1 inning away, 3 outs away from winning. Oklahoma State was 3 outs away from winning. So they have games where they've had their backs against the wall, but like they don't blink. They continue to just go. Like they know that they can do it. So I feel like the opponent is probably more stressing to get 3 outs than OU is stressing to tie or win the game. So I think their confidence is just unbelievable and through the roof. Don't get me wrong, they are super talented. But I think that confidence when they're behind just allows them to continue to play freely while the opponent is literally clawing to try to figure out how can we get out of the seventh before they score a run or 2 runs or whatever it is. So I think that's the big thing that stands out. But you have the three-headed monster in the circle, Storako, Day, Ball. I've had a couple conversations with people when all three are in the top 25 for player of the year. I'm not sure how you single one out over the other two, because it's the fact that all three of them work off each other that makes them successful. And then, just offensively, you still have Jada Coleman, who does Jada Coleman things, Tiara Jennings there, Grace Lyons, you name it, someone comes up big every game. And I really think, to be honest, Riley Boone down in the 9-hole probably is doing more than most people want to give credit for. I saw her turn the lineup over when they played against Texas, obviously, and just, there's no hole in their lineup. And even if they come up, bring someone off the bench, there's not a hole. So you have to be on your A game for the entire game, and every pitch has to count and has to matter against those. They don't let you sneak one by them.
Yeah, and they have a psychological edge on teams. You mentioned, I mean, getting those last 3 outs, can you know they're coming. Yeah, we saw that with Oklahoma State this past weekend. They were close right there, 3 outs. Young freshman's throwing a great game for them. Couldn't, they get a hit, 2 hits. Next thing you know, it just kind of, they have that psychological edge that a lot of championship teams do. A lot of championship players sometimes might have, that it takes, that hurdle to overcome. But that's what they've built with, is the two-time defending national champs. And their pitching staff might be the deepest it's had in a while with the three-headed you talked about.
Well, yeah, it's deep and they're all good. I mean, I think that's the big thing. And it's, again, don't get me wrong, there's people that can put up runs. Oklahoma State put up runs against them, Texas put up runs against them, Baylor won. It's not like they're shutting everyone out, but it's the fact that you have to outscore an opponent that puts up runs with ease, and almost kind of video game like, oh, we might struggle through 5 or 6, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, your lead's gone, and they figured out how to play the game. So there's a psychological edge, but I think the pitching staff being deep is really the bigger piece this year for them.
They are the top seed. They'll get the bye into the semifinals. They're going to play the winner of Baylor and Iowa State. Baylor's the 4th seed, but a hot team that just coming off sweeping Texas. Glenn Moore and company. I spoke to Glenn Moore. He said last year they were young. They went to the NIC, thought that would benefit them this year, and it has. They've got 2 wins over Tennessee. They're the only team to have beaten Oklahoma this year. They've gotten 3 wins over Texas. They're in the mix to host in the top 16. What was your thoughts on seeing Baylor here, a team that has got an impressive resume, 7 top 25 RPI wins? They're definitely in the conversation to host, and perhaps with a good Big 12 showing here, could lock up a top 16 host.
Yeah. I was impressed. I think Baylor plays the way Glenn Moore's program always plays. They play clean. They play a quick game. They like short game. They like running. Shaylin Govan has been the biggest addition to their offense. With one swing of the bat, she can change the game. So her power really brings something to their lineup that they don't always have year in and year out. So she has 2 more years there. Glenn Moore already touting her as one of the best hitters that he's coached, which is saying a lot because he's had some really good players come through there. I was impressed. The biggest question mark for them is going to be their pitching. They're short staffed. They have pretty much Dari Orm and Riley Crandall who carried the load. Although we didn't see Dari Orem at all in the series against Texas. It was only Riley Crandall and Casey West. So, and West didn't throw a whole lot at the beginning part of the year, but has eaten some innings here as of late. So the question is going to be if their pitching can last for them to get farther in the tournament or not. But the other thing to me is they are coming off a hot sweep of Texas, but Iowa State took 2 of 3 from them the weekend before. So you have Iowa State, who is very confident against Baylor. And fun fact, I went back and looked. Iowa State also took 2 of 3 from them last year. So Iowa State is not going to go in with any type of fear against Baylor, I don't feel like. So it could be a slugfest. It could be which team outscores the other. My only thing, again, Baylor has the short game and the speed that I think could be game-changing difference.
Right about Iowa State. They're actually playing really well down the stretch. Jamie Pinkerton, has a core of that group that made the NCAAs a couple years. They got off to a rough start this year. Some of their players that they thought they would hit weren't hitting, but now they're starting to click. It's funny. I just looked at the RPI as we're recording this. 76 is their RPI. That's the worst RPI than any Big 12 team, which tells you how strong the Big 12 is and why, according to the RPI, it's considered the #1 conference in college softball. The worst team is 76 RPI wise, quote unquote. That is impressive.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there have been years for the Big 12 where it was definitely split. Like you had your top 4 and your bottom. And I don't feel like this year that split was very big at all, because you have Kansas took 1 from Texas. You had Tech take 1 from Oklahoma State. Kansas or Iowa State took 1 from Oklahoma State and 2 from Baylor. Like there was just a lot more parity within when the top and the bottoms played, to where the games were competitive. And I mean, Tech got swept by Texas, and I'm sure we'll get to that matchup next, but Texas was trailing the first 2 games.
Well, you mentioned Texas. You mentioned they're the 2 seed. Let's talk about Texas, because I thought with the personnel they lost last year that they might take a step back. I actually think Mike White's done one of his better jobs, considering how young. I know it's talented, but it's a young roster for the most part, especially losing who you lost last year. Haley Docini in the circle you lost. You lose one of the best infielders Texas has ever had, one of the best offensive players ever. Jefferson, a 4-time All-American. I think she joined you on that list, I want to say, if I remember. And yet,
yes,
up until this past weekend, there was conversations of you being a top 8 seed. You still could be with a good run in the Big 12 tournament. You're likely to host, but what's been your thoughts on this job Mike White's done with his young Longhorns team?
I think he's done a great job. Him and his staff, they didn't miss a beat. You talk about losing player personnel. He also lost Megan Bartlett as an assistant, so he had to fill that in with Kristen Zaleski. But she's come in and done a great job, and it's been a smooth transition, to be honest. Not sure everyone expected the freshmen to hit the way they hit. I think they knew they had potential, but the way the 3 that are true freshmen, plus you add the redshirt freshman and Ashton Maloney, who so many people overlook because she came in last year and sat out due to her knee injury. But the 4 of them have put up so many incredible numbers. At one point in time, I think they were like 48% of the team's RBIs were from the 4 of them. And so, they've just done a good job of mixing and matching and figuring out who fits where. You've seen Mia Scott move to the outfield this year in order to open up the infield for Leanne Good and Vivi Martinez to both be in there, which is going to be the long-term future of that program. So it's been fun to watch, but I think Texas being able to manage the ups and downs of a college season and keep mainly the three true freshmen on course with the ups and downs. They started out hot, and I was waiting for a slide to happen, and they all had some slides, but they were minimal. And I think that's the big key, is if you, as a freshman, you can get them to deal with, the slumps and shorten them, then you have a little bit more success for the rest of their career.
Yeah, I think with this core coming back next year, with the way Mike White recruits, this team could be a top 10 team easily going into next year and beyond, and kind of see Texas become a perennial top 10 team. But they did have a bump in the road with Baylor. How do you bounce back if you're a young Texas team? Is that something, now you got to play in the Big 12 tournament, playing Texas Tech after a bump on the road, getting swept by Baylor? How does a young group respond to that? A veteran team maybe can brush that off, but how does a young player brush that off?
Well, I think if you're a young player, it does one of two things. It either gut checks you and you can feel sorry for yourself and, woe is me, or it gut checks you and you kind of come back with a vengeance and you're ready to, basically say that's not how we play, that's not who we are, that kind of thing. So I'm hoping they respond in the more positive way. I think what I really think is the veterans who went through Clearwater last year probably can say, "Hey, this is our mini Clearwater. Like it's not going to be held on to like everyone in the media wanted to hold on to it all season long last year. But this is our mini Clearwater. This is how we're going to respond, and let's go."
Well, I remember last year they got swept late in the year by Oklahoma State, gut wrenching series up in Stillwater. Lost the game to Baylor, got knocked out by Oklahoma State in the Big 12 tournament. Didn't host, but they were able to regroup and make that great run to the national championship series. So they have, you're right. You can just kind of go back to last year. That's up to the veteran leadership that you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I think they have enough that were there. Alyssa Washington, Courtney Day, the pitching staff, other than Mac Morgan and Citlali Gutierrez was there, Bella Dayton. They have plenty of them that went through it that, that it didn't sit right with them. And so, hey, you know what? We didn't let that phase us, and this is where we got. So we're not going to let this phase us. Let's go ahead and, put our best foot forward going into Big 12. And, again, we talk about it, the parity in the Big 12, anything can go.
And they will open with Texas Tech, who's under first-year head coach Craig Snyder, former Florida State assistant, former Texas A&M assistant. They've set records with the home run ball, long ball this year, which is typical of a Coach Snyder who runs the offense. They're explosive offensively. They're in the 60s RPI, massive improvement from last year. A great job he's done in his first year. What stands out to you? Because you mentioned him. They gave Texas fits when they played earlier in the year.
Oh yeah, Craig Snyder's done a great job there. I think what stands out is the games that they keep close. Texas, he went, deep in games with his starter for the most part. They had a game that they kept Oklahoma to minimal runs, and I know he used 3 or 4 pitchers, and I think that's kind of their advantage is they do have a deeper staff. So if he needs to, he can run out a pitcher every inning or a pitcher every time through the order. And so I think they'll probably utilize that more during the Big 12 tournament, one, to keep their arms fresh, but two, to keep opponents' offenses at bay. But Craig Snyder's known for his offense and the way he implements that. He did a great job at Florida State, and he's doing that in the first year. And it was interesting talking to him, hey, what did you do? And he's like, oh, I didn't change anybody's swings. I just changed their mindset. We worked on a few movement patterns and just getting their body like hips loosened up and knowing the right way for that to move. But really, it's just about mindset and, getting them to attack the pitches we want them to attack. And I was just like, wait a minute, you changed no mechanics. And all of a sudden, I think there was a kid who had only hit maybe 3 home runs in her first 2 years or 3 years there. And she'd already had like 8 coming into the Texas weekend. And I'm just like, no mechanics were changed though. So that just shows, what he's capable of doing. And I think in the long run, he's gonna make Texas Tech into something special. It's fun to watch, and you can just tell when they play that they're playing with a different passion, a different feel, and that him and his staff truly are on board with their players and just speaking life into them, really, because they play and they don't give up. This Sunday against Texas, game 3. They got behind early, and that might have been the only time I kind of saw them let down just a little bit. And but other than that, I mean, they were clawing and fighting every inning of every game that I've watched.
Well, they've been scrappy. They've won some big games, including a game against Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's the 3 seed. They will take on Kansas, who's the 6. Oklahoma State limping here, though. Kind of struggling. Obviously, getting swept by Oklahoma, that's one thing, but they've been scuffling, losing to North Texas. You mentioned Rodney DeLong earlier. Really haven't been the same team since Texas swept them at Austin. Do you have concerns about the Cowgirls going in, or is it one of those things where they can kind of regroup here now with the Big 12 tournament and then the regionals? They still have an incredible resume, possibly going to be a top 8 seed, but there's certainly some questions after the way they're kind of limping in. I think they're now 2-8 in their last 10, something like that. Not the way Kenny Gajewski had in mind coming in.
Well, you go back even further than the Texas series. They lost to Iowa State, then they lost to Wichita State, then they lost to Texas, and then you go into North Texas and OU. So I think the big thing, and even the sweep of Oklahoma State was great for Texas, but both offenses weren't really producing. I mean, Texas was no hit for 12 of the first 14 innings that they played and ended up
Wow.
with 2 walk-offs. But at the same time, Oklahoma State was having runners in scoring position, unable to bring them in. So really, offensively, I think there became probably some pressure. I think the last few years, Oklahoma State's been good. They're in the national conversation for everybody, but the expectation wasn't so high within their program, I think. And I think right now, all eyes are expecting things from them, and it's figuring out how to play with that pressure. And so the biggest thing is offensively, they just have to turn it on. I know they scored a little bit more against Oklahoma than they did in Austin. But they're just offensively going to have to come through. I know Rachel Becker at the top of the lineup is a hard out, but everyone behind her has to be able to drive her in and continue to turn the lineup over. And I think that's just kind of where they struggled early on was, or not early on, but early on in the slump is just they had opportunities to cash in and they didn't. And so then the pressure keeps mounting on the next person and the next opportunity and the next RBI situation to where eventually you're, carrying a 1,000-ton gorilla and waiting for him to jump off your back to where everyone can breathe again.
Yeah, that's a great point because this year a lot of people thought they could be the biggest threat to Oklahoma for the national title. Them and UCLA, and they were right there 2-3 most of the year. And you're right, they've kind of had some speed bumps there. And they're going to open with a Kansas team that's kind of scrappy. Jennifer McFalls and company. You mentioned they took a game from Texas earlier this year. They beat Baylor this year, so they're capable of. What was your thoughts on seeing Kansas live? Because they're an improved team. I know when I spoke to Coach McFalls before the year, she talked about some injuries that have kind of derailed them the last couple of years, but much improved this year.
No, I was really impressed with Kansas. The way they played the game, they came out super aggressive against Texas. Offensively, they were ready to swing the bat first pitch. Estelle Check started game 1, and the first pitch of the game went to the wall for a double, and Kansas never looked back in that game. And so they truly try to create their own momentum. They don't let the other team dictate a whole lot. They really just stay within themselves and play. I thought offensively, their game plan was good. They were being aggressive. Their swings looked good. I left that series and I told a couple friends, I was like, they are like 2 really good players from being, in a situation where we're not saying, they're in the NCAA tournament, in my opinion, with 1 or 2 more good players. Or I should say like just another couple like game changer type players.
Right, put them over the top. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're right there knocking on the door. Casey Hamilton in the circle was so fun to watch. She's a fiery little thing. She gets excited on strikeouts. She knows how to, command the strike zone. Now again, I think they need another arm behind her. So that might be one of those 2 game-changing players that I'm talking about, is another arm behind her to where you don't have to rely on her so much to get your wins. But I'm interested to see what happens next year because they have a freshman who throws it well. They've used her late in games as kind of more of a closer, not necessarily putting too much pressure on her this year. But she threw 1 or 2 innings at the end of game 3. I think it was game 3. And she was impressive. I was like, if they used her more often, I think, this could be a real deal for them. So, they're right there. I think they're right there. I think another year, if they can do what they want to do with recruits and, just getting another year of experience with this group, I think they could make some noise next year in the Big 12.
I know in talking to Big 12 coaches, they want to get to the point, and obviously there's going to be some changes with departures and additions, but they kind of want to be where the SEC and the Pac-12 is, where they get the majority of the league in. And you look at last year, the Oklahoma State, Texas all got in, all made it to the World Series. They were the last 3 teams standing in OKC. Do you see that with the Big 12, maybe even next year, where you mentioned Kansas maybe a couple of pieces away? Iowa State, Jamie Pickerton does a good job. Craig Snyder building Texas Tech. You've got a team like UCF that's obviously had success building. BYU, can this Big 12 next year, could we be talking about a league that's right there with the Pac-12 and SEC as far as putting 6, 7 teams in a field?
I don't know if it'll be as quick as next year. I'd love to say it could be. Again, I think some of it has to be with scheduling with Kansas and Tech and Iowa State. I think UCF obviously will be in the mix again next year. Houston could possibly be in that mix depending on how their recruiting pans out. But I think within a couple years, you really might be having a conversation where there's more than 4 teams going, and you're getting down into 5, 6, 7. I mean, I know sometimes when you watch the Big 12 this season, there are times where you watch Texas Tech play and you're like, man, they could make the tournament. Like they could when they're playing like that, but then you look at their RPI and you're like, Amanda Scarborough and I were having that conversation. She's like, man, I think Texas Tech should make the tournament. And I'm like, their RPI is lower than Kansas. So Kansas has to get in first. And she's like, oh, really? And I was like, yeah. But I was like, but I watched Kansas play Texas. And if they play like that, they could be in the tournament at some point too. So yeah, I think you have some teams knocking on the wall or knocking on the door that, they could be getting that invitation soon. And so it'll be fun to see. It would be nice if it was next year with Texas and OU still in it. And be able to say, they left when the conference got to where it was 6 teams. And then after that, they maintained that. But we'll see. I think the key is, who comes in for Tech and Kansas, and which players, grow over the summer to be able to make an impact next year.
The league's looking at 4 bids more than likely, unless Iowa State, Kansas, or Texas Tech win the Big 12 tournament. It's probably going to be 4. Could have 4 host teams. We won't know that until Selection Sunday. Let me ask you this: could all 4, Baylor, Texas, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, do you see a path where all can make it to Oklahoma City?
Ooh, I mean, again, I think 3 for sure, and I'm not being biased. I mean, I do think when Texas is playing well that they're a really good team. Oklahoma State, obviously, if they can find their offense again, they're an extremely strong team, and OU is a no-brainer. I'm going to go back to the pitching staff for Baylor. That's going to be the biggest question mark. And can they outscore another team with elite arms? I mean, I know they've shown it at times this year. Can you do it 2 out of 3 after coming off a regional where it was 2 out of 3 or where you had to win a tournament? So that'll just be my only question, because, Baylor's going to have to make a good showing in the Big 12 tournament, I think. So you're going to have to use Daria Orm. You're going to have to, you're going to have to utilize the 3 that you do have. And then to get out of regionals, I think you're going to have to utilize those 3 as well. And I'm not so sure that's not why they didn't. That's why they rested her against Texas. They might have been. I know she's been dealing with a little bit of some injury plague. And so they might have been resting her for the postseason stretch and not putting another weekend on her arm if they didn't have to.
Well, the thing is, we don't know whether Baylor hosts or doesn't. They're probably going to be in a stacked regional. Could be paired up with somebody like Louisiana. Jerry Glasgow's team could be paired up with somebody else. So that's kind of the tougher road. But I know this: nobody's going to be happy to see Baylor in their bracket, regardless where it is, whether it's Waco or in their park.
Yeah. No, I mean, you get a really, really strong team, or you get a pretty strong team either way. I don't think there have been some losses, but not ones where you just flat out look and they just played really bad. I got to watch them play Texas State and they won that game by 1 run in extra innings. And that was a different team than what I saw against Texas, but both teams were good. One was just better degree of good than the other. So, but that's Glenn Moore. I mean, he's always put together a program that competes game after game. Even last year, they were young and they, didn't have a lot of success, but they competed game after game. And he's able to get that out of his program year in and year out.
Last question for you. What's going to be the key for all the teams in the Big 12 to have success in the Big 12 tournament? What are a couple of ingredients that's a common thing that you feel like if you do these couple things, you're going to have a successful week there in the tournament?
Stay hydrated, go to bed, and don't go over to the baseball field in Bricktown. No, I think, I mean, the big thing is it's a mini setup of Oklahoma City when you go to the World Series, pretty much. I know the tournament bracket's not the same as when I played because of fewer teams, but you're in that atmosphere. So it's being able to manage emotions and manage expectations. And then just remember, like, it's the same game that you've been playing all season long. Like you're on the big stage, even though it's not the World Series, you're still in that venue. So the big key is in that venue, continue to play softball the way you have all year. Don't make any pitcher at bat bigger than the last, and let your preparation work. So I think the big thing is manage your emotions and then just go play. go play and let everything fall into place.
Should be fun. Big 12 tournament this week. I know you'll be following it closely with the family, and then you'll be calling a regional and maybe some downtime finally after that a little bit. Try to get some rest. But you've convinced me now. If you're going to the Big 12 tournament next year, I'm going to go with you because clearly you know where to go and what to do and not to do. So,
Yeah, we can go. I've been to Oklahoma City more times than I can count between Big 12 play, World Series, Team USA, you name it. So,
it's like a
but
second
yeah,
home.
there was a point in time where Oklahoma City was my second home, especially every summer when they hosted the World Cup of softball there. So I was there for the World Series and then back usually about a month later. So um, I've done plenty of time in Oklahoma City, but I do enjoy it. It's a great place, and obviously, our center of the softball world.
Center of the softball. It's well described there. Yeah. And a lot of people always like enjoy seeing you in person, and that'll be fun. But thanks for doing this. I know it's busy with family and getting ready for his softball postseason, but always great to talk to and catch up on with you, and glad everything's doing well. Is if you obviously everybody knows where to find you now on social media, but go ahead. I'll give you the chance to promote what you got coming up.
Yeah. Um, so all I have left for commentating is regionals, so I will be calling that. But you can follow me Instagram at Kat Osterman, Twitter at Kat Osterman. I have a Facebook page, which is just search Kat Osterman, it'll pop up. Keep everything simple. But yeah, I will be commentating and then smooth sailing straight into travel ball coaching this summer. So I'll be on the road with the Bombers as soon as postseason wraps up.
We'll have to get you back on and talk more in depth about that down the road when we have more
Oh
time.
yeah, we had a crop of freshmen this year that I could have
Woo!
talked to you all day about. Citlali Gutierrez and Leanne Good are both Bombers. Macy Bergeron at LSU is one of ours that played for us last year. Maya Davis at Louisiana was one of ours. Who else? Avery Hodge is at OU. SJ Guerin is at OU, but I believe redshirting this year.
Well, that's got to help
Iona.
you spread out the coverage there as you're following because you got a lot of
Mhm.
players now you got to follow.
Oh yeah, and then we have Iona Coleman and Keely Williams are at A&M. So it's been fun. Yeah, my one of our baby pictures with my daughter was all the onesies that had been sent to her by either the girls. Oh, we have one at Tennessee too. Destiny Rodriguez is at Tennessee. So she had onesies from all the schools around around her little basket. So whether it's our kids that are there now or the ones that are committed and will sign their NLIs in November. She's decked out in every school you can imagine. If we're watching them play, I put their onesie on so I can take a picture and let my kids know that she's cheering for them.
Ooh, look at that. All right. Well, all right, we'll make a deal. We'll try to get you back on some point this summer, talk little Bombers and talk that aspect of the world
Cool.
there that you're now involved. But I figure
Yeah.
and for now we'll focus on the college
Mhm.
landscape. But
Let's do that for
let,
sure.
thanks for doing this. Always enjoy talking, and we'll talk soon.
All right, sounds good.